Where grief leans hardest, the drowned city answers. Maren dug her heels into the cold mud and pulled while the rope cut her palms raw. Salt wind stung her eyes. Beneath the flats, a bell struck once, then again, slow as a heart under water. The rope had not been there at dusk, and her dead brother's name rode the fog. When the second bell rolled under the night, she should have run for the dike. Instead she wrapped the black strand around her wrist and leaned back with all her weight. 3 weeks had passed since the storm took Hin and his skiff beyond the shoals. The sea had returned planks, a smashed oarlock, and one boot. It had not returned his body. In the village, women lowered their voices when Maren crossed the lane. Her father kept the ferry chain oiled and said little. Grief sat in their house like wet wool. That evening the tide fell farther than she had seen in winter. The Wadden Sea opened in long ribs of shining mud, and from that exposed dark came the sound old people named only after ale and prayer, the bells of Rungholt, the drowned city. Maren heard them clear as iron. Then she saw the rope lifting from the flats, black, slick, and tight, as if some buried hand had thrown it up for her alone. At the edge of low tide, by dawn the rope was gone. Only a groove in the mud showed where it had lain, straight as a road toward the outer flats. Maren stood over it with numb hands while gulls picked at stranded shells. Her father came down from the dike carrying the boat hook. The first gift from below carried the shape of hope. You heard them, she said. He looked past her to the tide line. I heard mud shifting. She opened her split palm. Black fibers clung in the cuts. For the first time in weeks, his face changed. He took her wrist, turned it to the light, and let go at once, as if the rope might still be there. At home he barred the door before the noon tide. He told her the old rule in the plain tone he used for weather and ferry fees. If Rungholt calls, you do not answer. The sea keeps what it has named. He had heard the bells once as a boy, after his own mother died in childbirth. His father tied him to the bedpost until morning. He never forgave the rope for making him want to go. That should have closed the matter. Instead it opened something in Maren. Until then, grief had been heavy and dull. Now it had shape. The drowned city had heard her. The sea had not gone deaf after taking Hin. The next low tide came under a sky the color of pewter. Maren waited until her father slept in the chair by the stove. She took Hin's old oilskin, a lantern, and the small knife she used for cutting bait. The flats stretched bare and silver under the wind. Far out, where no path should hold, a dark line stood upright from the mud. She reached it breathless. The rope rose from a patch of black silt that smelled of rot and old salt. It was thick as her thumb and warm despite the cold air. When she pulled, the mud below gave a soft sucking sigh. Something surfaced in the lantern glow and struck her boot. It was Hin's knife. Not hers. Not one like it, his. The horn handle bore the notch he had carved at 12 when he tried to sharpen it on the ferry chain. Sea film coated the blade, but the notch was there. Maren sank to her knees. She pressed the knife to her chest and laughed once, a rough sound that turned at once into sobbing. The bell rang again under her feet. One note. Waiting. The things the sea returned. After that, Maren lived by the tide table nailed near the ferry shed. She worked when she had to, spoke when spoken to, and kept her nights for the flats. Each time the sea withdrew, the bells rolled beneath the mud. Each time she found the rope waiting. The sea gave her a voice and opened a mouth beneath it. She pulled up Hin's knitted cap, stiff with salt. She pulled up a pipe he had stolen from their uncle and denied stealing for a year. She pulled up a brass button from the blue coat he wore on feast days. Every object came slick from the black seam below, exact and ordinary, carrying the force of a blow. None should have survived the storm. All of them did. Her father saw the pile growing on the table under the window. He touched nothing. These are hooks, he said. Not gifts. They prove he is there. They prove you are being led. She wanted to ask where, but she knew the answer. Out beyond the safe channels, beyond the poles and reed marks, lay the place old maps named and crossed out, Rungholt, swallowed by the Grode Mandrank, the great drowning. Fishermen said its church tower still stood under silt. They said cattle bells and wedding songs drifted up in fog. They also said no one who followed those sounds came back unchanged. On the 5th night the rope answered her with more than objects. She had braced both feet and hauled 3 arm lengths when the fog thickened around her. The flats vanished. The lantern became a yellow coin in wool. Then Hin's voice came from ahead. Maren. She froze so hard her shoulders shook. Maren, stop pulling like an ox. You'll snap it. That was his tone, half mockery, half care. She could hear the grin in it. She dropped the rope and turned. A figure moved in the fog, broad-shouldered, cap low, one hand raised. Water dripped from the hem of his coat. She ran toward him. The mud sucked at her boots. The figure stepped back once, then again, always one pace farther than her reach. She saw no face, only the line of his jaw and the familiar tilt of his head. Hin. The bell struck, louder now, and the fog tore sideways. There was no brother before her. There was only a tidal channel, newly opened, black and deep. One more stride and she would have gone into her waist, then under with the current. Her father's hand closed on her collar and jerked her back so hard she fell. He had followed her with a skiff line tied around his own chest. He stood over her panting, white with fury. "You want him," he said, "then the sea will take 2 more and call the bargain fair." She looked past him. The rope had gone slack. In the mud beside it lay Hin's cap. She reached for it as if nothing else in the world mattered. Her father kicked it away. That was the first time she hated him. The church beneath the flats. For 2 days her father kept the skiff key on his belt and watched her as if she were fevered. On the 3rd night a spring tide pulled the sea so far back that the village dogs whined and would not cross the yard. Maren waited until her father went to the privy, then took the key and ran. In the drowned church, love and hunger wore the same face. The mudflats lay open like a wound. The bells did not ring in single notes now. They swung in a pattern, slow and solemn, as if for burial. Maren followed the sound past the usual markers, past the last reed stake, into ground no ferryman would trust. The rope stood ahead of her, not one strand now but a line dropping into a hollow where the mud had sunk away. She climbed down and found stone. A church roof, broken and tilted, lay under a skin of silt and weed. One side of the tower had collapsed, but the bell frame still held. The black rope ran through a cracked arch and down into the dark nave below. Water moved inside with the tide, breathing in and out through shattered windows. Carved saints stared from the walls with their faces worn blank. Maren's lantern shook in her hand. She could smell old timber, salt, and the sweet foulness of long-closed water. On the floor below the arch lay the things she had pulled from the sea, arranged in a neat line: knife, cap, pipe, button. Beside them sat one more object she had never seen returned. Hin's hand-carved whistle. He had made it from elder wood and played it badly for months. No one else would know the crack near the mouthpiece. Maren picked it up and the breath left her body. A sound rose from the nave, soft at first, then clear. Not words, breathing, then a low hum from the tune their mother used to sing while mending nets. Maren stepped down into the church. Water covered the flagstones in a thin black sheet. Under it, shapes moved like drifting cloth. She saw doorways opening into side aisles, pews split and sunk, a silver flash that might have been fish. At the far end, where the altar should have stood, someone waited in the dark. Hin. The shape lifted its head. She saw enough. The cap, the shoulders, the familiar stillness before he spoke. Her whole body rushed toward him before her mind could hold it back. She waded forward, one hand out, the whistle clenched in the other. Then the lantern light touched his face. It was not ruined. That would have been easier. It was only incomplete, as if the sea had remembered him in pieces and left the rest to shadow. One eye caught the light. The other was a hollow of water. His mouth opened, and the bell above them gave a violent strike that shook mud from the rafters. Behind that shape, more forms stirred in the nave. Men in caps, women with folded hands, a child holding a shoe. They stood in rows where pews had once been, all waiting, all turned toward her with the patience of the drowned. The rope tightened in her hand and pulled downward. In that instant she understood the bargain. Rungholt did not return the dead. It fed on the shape grief gave them. It took memory, clothed itself in it, and reached upward for the living. If she pulled long enough, if she stepped deep enough, she would join the congregation below. Her father would hear the bells next. Maren drew the bait knife from her pocket. The blade looked small against the rope, black and wet as a seal's back. The shape in the dark lifted one hand to her, not in threat, but in appeal. Her brother's voice came once more, thin as mist. "Maren." She cut. The rope fought like living muscle. Fibers snapped one by one, then all at once. The bell gave a cracked roar. Water surged through the nave. The figures broke apart into weed, silt, and cold current. Maren fell backward against the steps as the church floor sank under a boil of black water. Hands seized her under the arms and dragged her up the slope. Her father had found her again. He hauled her across the roof stones as the hollow filled and vanished. By the time the tide turned, there was only mud, moonlight, and a scatter of bubbles bursting where the tower had been. When the tide turned, Marin slept for a day and a night. When she woke, her hands were bandaged and the whistle lay on the stool beside her bed. Her father sat by the window mending a net he did not need to mend. They gave the sea no path back through the heart. I should have burned those things sooner, he said. She looked at the whistle. No, I would only have gone after the smoke. After a while he nodded. It was the first honest thing either of them had said in weeks. They carried Hin's things to the shore at evening. The knife, the cap, the pipe, the button, the whistle. The tide was coming in, smooth and gray. Her father dug a pit above the rack line, where the marsh grass began. They laid the objects there, not to hide them from memory, but to keep them from the pull below. Marin kept the whistle in her hand the longest. Then she set it down and covered it with sand. No bell rang, no rope rose. Across the flats, only curlews called and the wind moved over the water. In spring she took the ferry on market days when her father's knee swelled in damp weather. She learned the channels as Hin had known them, by color, by current, by the lift of birds over hidden water. Some evenings, when fog pressed low on the dike, she felt a tightening in her chest and listened for iron under the mud. She never heard it again. Years later, people still spoke of Rungholt when storms stacked the horizon and church roofs groaned in the wind. Marin did not argue with them. She only said that the sea could keep a voice longer than a face, and both longer than a body. Then she took the ferry rope in both hands and drew the boat to shore.